Nora Blake's child is her only family, the only thing she has left after 5 years of hardship. I have to help her. I gazed calmly at Ethan Vance, who was standing in front of me with a look of desperation on his face. In that single quiet moment, I understood with a sudden, shocking clarity that I had been given another chance at life. I had been reborn. I lowered my eyes to my own body, my hand instinctively coming to rest on my slightly curved stomach. My child was still with me. "All right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I kept my hand pressed against my belly, fighting down the surge of grief that threatened to overwhelm me. Without another moment of hesitation, I reached for the pen and signed my name on the divorce papers. "The house belongs to me," I added, my voice flat and quiet. "Please move your things out as soon as you can." Ethan hadn't expected me to agree so readily. A brief flash of surprise crossed his face before it was replaced by pure, unadulterated joy, a kind of happiness I had never once seen him show in all the years we were together. "Thank you, Clara," he said, the words rushing out. "Nora and her son owe you everything. Once we get the child legally registered under Nora's name, I swear I'll remarry you." He said it quickly, almost as an afterthought. "But this has to be our secret. No one can know. Our marriage was a military one, and divorce isn't taken lightly." He had already explained the plan to me. He would tell everyone that he was the one who was infertile, that he was letting me go so I could find happiness elsewhere. I managed a cold, bitter smile and answered with a single word. "Fine." The wind howled outside, driving sheets of snow against the window panes. Just as I was about to ask if he could at least drive me home, Ethan spoke again, his voice filled with an excitement that stung. "Leo found out he's being officially registered. He's ecstatic. He wants to go to the movies to celebrate. He's never been to one before, and he's been talking about it for ages." He was already pulling on his coat and heading for the door. "I hope you can understand," he added, barely looking at me as he climbed into his Jeep. "You should head back by yourself." He didn't wait for me to reply. The engine roared to life and the Jeep disappeared into the swirling snow of the night. Snowflakes landed on the back of my neck, melting instantly and tracing icy paths down my skin. But the chill of the winter air was nothing compared to the profound cold that had settled deep inside my heart. With no other choice, I hugged my arms around myself and began the long walk back to the village, leaning into the wind and snow. I had just reached the edge of the village when the village head came marching towards me, his face a thunderous mask. "Clara Vance, this is a military marriage. How could you be so shameless carrying on behind Captain Vance's back? Do you have any idea what people are saying about you? That you're no better than... Well, I won't even repeat the words. I've heard you've been meeting with other men." The more he spoke, the darker his expression became. "Our village can't have this kind of stain on its reputation. You'd better watch yourself, Clara, or Captain Vance really will divorce you for good." I just stood there, stunned into silence. Ethan had promised he would tell everyone that he was the problem, that he couldn't have children. Why was I now being accused of being unfaithful? Anger bubbled up inside me, and I opened my mouth to set the record straight. But before I could utter a single word, a sharp, cramping pain shot through my abdomen. My first thought was of the baby. I clutched my stomach, told the village head I wasn't feeling well and would talk to him later, that I needed to rest. In this lifetime, I would protect my child no matter the cost. I supported myself against the wall as I walked into the main house. I reached for the bedroom door, but it swung open from the inside before my hand could touch the knob. Ethan stood there, blocking my way. "You're back late," he said. I froze, then peered past him into the room, and my heart plummeted. He had brought Nora and her son back to our house. Nora was lying on her side on our bed, gently patting the little boy's back, coaxing him to sleep. The entire scene made me feel like an intruder, like I was the one disturbing a peaceful, happy family. The pain in my chest was so sharp it felt like I was being stabbed with needles, but I forced my face to remain blank. I lifted my chin. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady and even. "We are divorced. This house is mine. I hope you haven't forgotten that." He looked at me with disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend why I would be so blunt. I'm sorry, Nora said suddenly, her voice soft and small. She had somehow slipped off the bed and was now standing beside me, looking up with wide, apologetic eyes. I didn't mean to be a bother. I'll take Leo and go right now. She made a move to leave, but Ethan quickly reached out and stopped her. He turned to me and shoved a worn travel bag into my hands, his annoyance clear. You know perfectly well that Nora's place is drafty and falling apart. With this much snow, it's not safe for them to be there. His tone hardened. You can't be this heartless, Clara. Enough of this drama. From now on, she and her son are staying here. He didn't wait for my response, simply turning to help Nora back to the bed. He then started unpacking her belongings, most of which looked brand new, probably just purchased. Nora smiled at him. Ethan, guess what? Leo saw the new leather shoes you bought me and said he needs a pair just like them. He wants to match with me. Then buy him whatever he wants, Ethan replied without a moment's thought. I stood there, my expression unreadable, still clutching the old, tattered bag he had thrust at me. We had been married for years, and not once had he ever bought me a gift on his own initiative. Yet for this other woman and her child, he was endlessly generous. Ethan turned back to me. Nora and Leo can't stay in the side room. It's far too small. They'll live in the main house. You can move into the side room. Seeing the look on my face, he lowered his voice, trying to placate me. Don't worry, this marriage to Nora is just a temporary arrangement. As soon as she's stable and can manage on her own with the child, I'll remarry you. It was already my second lifetime, and hearing that same empty promise again felt like nothing but a cruel joke. Without a word, I turned and walked away. Back in the side room, I barely had the energy to straighten things up before I collapsed onto the small, hard bed. My stomach had been aching for some time, and I was utterly exhausted. I quickly fell into a restless, troubled sleep. I had no idea how much time had passed when I heard the faint creak of the door opening. I forced my eyes open to see a small boy cautiously stepping into the room, holding something in his hands. It was Nora's son, Leo. Why was he here? I tried to push myself up, but a wave of dizziness washed over me. I touched my forehead. It was burning hot. I must have caught a bad chill during my long walk home in the snow. Struggling to sit up, I asked, "What are you doing in here?" The boy stared at me, his face filled with a hatred that was startling in one so young. He was still holding a bowl in his small hands. You stole my dad, he said, his voice cold. I won't let a person like you get away with it. I'm going to get my dad back. Before I could even process his words, he suddenly threw the bowl onto the floor. Without any hesitation, he slammed his tiny hand down onto the sharp, broken shards. Blood immediately began to well up from the wound, and he let out a piercing wail. Startled and furious, I scrambled out of bed and rushed to pull him away from the broken ceramic. Leo, what happened? I cried out. Before I could even get him away from the mess, Ethan appeared in the doorway. Just as I was about to explain what the boy had done, Leo's cries grew louder. Dad! Nora came running in right behind Ethan. When she saw the blood pouring from Leo's hand, her eyes filled with tears. She rushed over, scooped the boy into her arms, and then turned to me, her face a mask of anger and accusation. Sister-in-law, I know you don't like us being here, but how could you hurt a child? Leo clung to Nora, sobbing. I was scared she would kick us out, so I went to the kitchen to make her a bowl of brown sugar water. But she called me a bastard. She said I stole my dad, and then she pushed me. That little liar. How dare he twist the truth like that? My entire body trembled with rage, and I opened my mouth to defend myself. The next second, a sharp, stinging slap landed across my face. The force of it sent me stumbling back onto the bed. My right ear was ringing loudly, and the room spun around me. I heard Ethan's furious voice from somewhere above me. How could you be so cruel? To hurt a child like that? My stomach had slammed hard against the edge of the bed frame, sending a fresh wave of sharp pain through me. But Ethan acted as if he didn't even notice. He turned to Nora and said urgently, Leo's hand is cut badly. He needs to go to the hospital right away. He scooped the boy up in one arm and grabbed Nora with the other, preparing to leave. The pain in my abdomen was getting worse. I stumbled forward and grabbed his sleeve. Please take me to the hospital first, I begged. My stomach, it hurts so much. Something is wrong with the baby. But Ethan wouldn't even look at me. He roughly pushed my hand away and said angrily, "What are you making a scene for? Just get some rest. Leo is bleeding everywhere, and you're here arguing with a child." He didn't give me another chance to speak. He simply took Nora's arm and walked out with her. The pain in my stomach was becoming unbearable. I knew I couldn't just lie here. Forcing myself to stay upright, I grabbed what little cash I had and stumbled out the door, heading alone toward the nearest community clinic. When the doctor saw me, he immediately started scolding me. "What were you thinking? You're pregnant. How could you be so careless? You're lucky you came when you did. Another hour and you might have lost this baby." I tried to force a weak smile of gratitude, but the movement pulled at the fresh bruise on my cheek, making me wince. The doctor saw the state I was in and could only shake his head in weary silence. I sat alone in the clinic while they gave me an IV drip. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I could no longer rely on Ethan for anything. I had to start making plans for myself and my child. From the way he was acting, it was clear that even the house he had promised me was no longer a guarantee. I needed to find a way to earn more money, for my own sake, and for the baby I was determined to protect. When I got home, I packed the medicinal herbs I had carefully prepared into a large bag, planning to take them into town to sell. But just as I was about to leave, the bag was yanked violently from my hand. The contents spilled all over the floor. I looked up and saw it was Nora. She was alone. There was no sign of Ethan or Leo. When she saw the herbs scattered on the ground, a cold, mocking laugh escaped her lips. Then, she deliberately lifted her foot and stomped on them. "Clara," Nora said, her voice sharp and contemptuous, "you really dared to sell these things for profit. You even stole from the community supply. Tell me, just how much money have you secretly squirreled away over the years?" I was stunned. "What nonsense are you talking about?" "Nonsense," Nora snapped. She pulled a small metal box from behind her back. "Then explain this. Where did all this money come from?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I recognized that box instantly. It was where I kept all my savings. Panic surged through me and I lunged for it. "Who told you you could touch my things?" "Nora, give that back. That money was everything I had. It was meant for the birth and for raising my child. I couldn't let her take it." I rushed forward, grabbing a fistful of her hair with one hand while reaching for the box with the other. We struggled, and the commotion quickly drew a crowd of neighbors. People began to gather, surrounding us, whispering and watching the spectacle unfold. Just then, Ethan returned with Leo. When he saw me clutching Nora's hair, he let out a furious roar. "Clara, have you lost your mind?" He stormed over and pulled me away with such force that I stumbled backward and fell into the pile of firewood stacked against the wall. Sharp branches scraped against my face, leaving long, bleeding scratches. But none of that physical pain compared to the agony I felt inside. In that moment, I was just grateful that I had fallen onto the wood pile instead of the hard ground. If I had landed any harder, something terrible might have happened to the baby. "Clara, what is this madness?" Ethan snapped. I looked at him, my vision blurred with tears, and finally broke down. I didn't try to explain. What was the use? Ethan would never believe a word I said now. Since that was the reality, why should I waste my breath? I had lost the money, but I could always earn more. What I couldn't afford was for something to happen to my child. Through my tears, I said, "Ethan, you know better than anyone how I've lived these past few years. I was always frugal, careful with every single cent. I never made money of my own, and I almost never spent any. I barely spent a few dollars in an entire year. The money Nora found, those savings were all I had, painfully put aside for the future." Ethan froze for a moment, his brows knitting together in a deep frown. He instinctively took a step forward as if to help me, but I was faster. I pressed my hands to the floor and pushed myself upright before he could touch me. I said nothing more. I just turned and walked straight back to my room. For the next 2 days, I stayed in the small side room, resting and not bothering with anything that involved Ethan or Nora. That morning, when I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the iron box sitting on my nightstand. I clutched it to my chest, letting out a long sigh of relief. I didn't know or care what had prompted Ethan to return it, but that money meant survival to me. I would not let anyone take it away from me again. Later that evening, just as I was about to lie down, the door burst open with a loud crash. Ethan stormed in, his face contorted with fury. "Clara!" he shouted. "What are you trying to do? Are you going to keep pushing Nora until she breaks?" I had no idea what he was talking about this time. Nora stepped into the room behind him. Her clothes were torn and a large red handprint was visible on her cheek. She was crying so hard, her entire body was shaking. In a trembling voice, she said, "Ethan, brother, please don't blame your wife. I'm sure she didn't mean to knock me out and leave me there for others to hurt." Ethan's rage only intensified. He grabbed me by the wrist and dragged me off the bed, forcing me to stand in front of Nora. "Apologize to her," he yelled. "Right now!" He glared at me as he continued, his voice full of venom. "How could you accuse her of something so vile, of sneaking around with other men? You're unbelievable." He pointed a finger at me. "And after you apologize, you're going to clear her name in front of everyone. You'll tell them the truth that you were the one who framed her." My arm throbbed with pain, feeling as if it had been pulled from its socket. But the sharp agony in my chest was far worse. Ethan, who I once knew as the calm, collected leader, always in control, became a completely different person the moment Nora was involved. He was incapable of thinking clearly when it came to her. "Why should I?" I asked, yanking my arm free from his grip. "Why should I sacrifice myself just to protect Nora's reputation?" My refusal only made him angrier. "You made this mess. Now you're going to own up to it," he shouted. I had never seen him this furious. Without another word, he grabbed me again and dragged me outside, pushing me into the dark, cold storage shed. "You will stay in here until you've had time to reflect on what you've done. You can come out when you finally come to your senses." Then he slammed the door shut and slid the bolt, locking it from the outside. In the suffocating darkness of the shed, I curled into a corner, hugging my knees to my chest. Sometime later, the door creaked open and Nora walked in carrying a bowl of noodles. She said gently, "Sister-in-law, Ethan only yelled because he was angry. He regretted it right afterward. He told me to bring you something to eat. Come on, have a few bites to warm up. After that, just say a few soft words to him and this will all blow over." I glanced down at the bowl of plain broth and noodles. My brow furrowed. In my previous life, Ethan had drugged me and left me in a cornfield where I was attacked. There was no way I was eating anything she gave me. When she saw that I had no intention of touching the food, Nora came closer. She grabbed my arm tightly, then forced her fingers under my chin, trying to pour the noodle broth into my mouth. I struggled and pushed her away, but she slapped me hard across the face. My head swam, and I saw stars. In that moment of weakness, she shoved a spoonful of the broth past my lips. "This is from Ethan," she said with a cold, triumphant smile. "He wants you to remember this lesson, so you never dare to mess with me again." Suddenly, my stomach cramped with a violent, searing pain. I clutched it tightly, glaring at Nora with pure hatred. "What did you make me eat?" I demanded. I had already agreed to the divorce. I hadn't fought them for the house. Why were they still doing this to me? I turned, trying to spit the food out. "Nora, I know you want to hurt me, but why would you harm my child?" "Child?" Nora sneered. "Don't you dare accuse me. I didn't lay a finger on your precious baby. But if someone can't control herself and gets into trouble, then loses her child in the process, well, that's her own fault, not mine." She stepped forward and began pulling at my clothes. "Clara, soon the entire village will know what you did. That you were found sneaking around with another man in the woodshed behind Ethan's back." As she tugged at my clothes, her eyes locked on my stomach, filled with a terrifying hatred. "You're already divorced. Why are you still keeping this baby? I knew it. You still want to hold on to Ethan." She clenched her teeth and spat the words out. This bastard child should have never existed." Just then, the shed door burst open, and a foul-smelling man stumbled in, drooling and muttering to himself. It was Martin, the village fool. Everyone in town knew him. He had the mind of a child and wandered around aimlessly. He was harmless, but always unkempt. And now, here he was, right in front of me. Nora. That woman was truly heartless. She wanted to let Martin hurt me. She knew that even if something terrible happened, no one would hold him responsible. After all, what could you expect from a man who didn't even understand right from wrong? My head was spinning, my limbs felt weak and heavy, but I knew I couldn't afford to pass out. I grabbed a sharp piece of a broken tree branch nearby and jabbed it hard into the palm of my hand. The piercing pain jolted me back to consciousness, enough to steady my thoughts. I reached for a thick piece of firewood and swung it with all my might at Martin's head. I didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. Without hesitating, I lunged at Nora, grabbed a handful of her hair, and slammed her to the ground, pinning her beneath me. I clutched her throat from behind, my fingers tight with rage. "You tried to harm my child," I growled. "Now I will take your life." Nora struggled beneath me, her eyes wide with terror as she gasped for air. She began to roll her eyes back, barely breathing. Suddenly, the door flew open again with a loud crash. Ethan stormed in. He rushed over and yanked me off of Nora. She immediately crawled to her feet and threw herself into his arms, sobbing hysterically. "Ethan, did you see that?" she cried. "Your sister-in-law has lost her mind. She was trying to seduce Martin, that lunatic. I caught her in the act, and she tried to kill me to keep me quiet." Ethan turned to look at me. His eyes were cold and filled with utter contempt. "Clara," he spat, "you are truly disgusting." I stood frozen, staring at him in disbelief as my heart shattered into a million pieces. He was a company commander, a man in uniform. How could he have lost all sense of judgment? Anyone with a brain could see exactly what had just happened here. Even a fool would know. And yet, he chose to believe Nora, so this was love. Or, more accurately, the lack of it. Without love, even the most profound cruelty came easily. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through my stomach again. Clutching my belly, I began to cry. "Ethan, please, save our baby." But Ethan only stared at me, his face an expressionless mask. "Go walk around the village," he said, his voice cold and hard, "and tell everyone it was you who lied about Nora. Admit that you falsely accused her of cheating." The pain in my stomach worsened, but I didn't dare hesitate. I forced myself to walk through the village, holding my belly, repeating the lie Ethan had forced me to say. Only then, when my humiliation was complete, did he finally agree to take me to the clinic? I was rushed into the emergency room. Ethan didn't come in with me. He turned around and left without another word. Tears streamed down my face. That was it. I would never look back again. "Ethan Vance, we are finished forever. When I was discharged from the hospital, I went straight to the village head and asked him for a letter of recommendation. Then, I boarded the next train to the capital city. The engine roared as the train pulled away from the station, but my heart remained restless. After a few days in the hospital, my condition had stabilized, but the doctor had given me a stark warning. My health was extremely fragile. I needed plenty of rest. Leaning back in my seat, my face was pale, and a wave of nausea washed over me. A middle-aged woman sitting next to me glanced over with a frown. "What are you acting so delicate for?" she said impatiently. "Never ridden a train before?" I turned to look at her, my face blank, and said nothing. I shifted my gaze to the window, watching as trees and rooftops zipped past, fading quickly into the distance. It looked just like my past life, slipping away fast and unreachable. Suddenly, a sharp pain tore through my stomach. I bolted upright, clutching my belly, my face draining of all color. The pain only grew stronger, and panic welled up in my chest. I groaned, slid from my seat, and collapsed onto the floor of the train car. The people around me gasped and rushed over. Someone crouched beside me, asking urgently what was wrong. Another person ran off to find the train attendant. Someone else shouted for a doctor. I lay on the ground, doubled over in pain, clutching my belly as a sharp, unbearable ache tore through me. The agony was so intense that I felt myself slipping in and out of consciousness. "Make way, I'm a doctor," said a calm, authoritative voice from behind the concerned crowd. A large hand pushed through the bystanders and gently took hold of my arm. I turned my head to look. The man wore a bright floral shirt under a tailored blazer, and his hair was slicked back neatly, gleaming under the train car's lights. "Let me take a look," he said. lowering himself onto one knee beside me. He placed 2 fingers on my wrist to check my pulse, his expression focused and unreadable. Gripping the sleeve of his jacket tightly, I cried out in desperation, "Please, I'm begging you, save my baby." He didn't reply right away, simply continuing to focus on my pulse before bending over to listen closely to my abdomen. I stared at him, anxiety mounting in my chest. What is happening? What about the baby? Please tell me something. He finally spoke, his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm going to give you some medicine to help stabilize your condition for now, but as soon as we get off this train, you need to go straight to a hospital for proper care. You cannot delay." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small box of medicine. Taking out 2 tablets, he gently placed them in my mouth. After asking someone nearby for water, he helped me sit up slightly and guided the cup to my lips so I could swallow the pills. Just then, 2 tall, rough-looking men shoved their way into the crowd. "Sweetheart, why did you run off like that?" one of them shouted as he lunged toward me. "I've been looking for you everywhere," he said accusingly. "So what if we had an argument? You shouldn't have stormed off like that." My entire body began to tremble. I could tell immediately that these men meant me harm. My instincts were screaming danger. "Who are you calling sweetheart?" the man in the floral shirt said sharply, stepping protectively in front of me. "That's my wife," the man insisted loudly. "We had a fight and she ran off. I've been searching all over for her." Without missing a beat, the man in the floral shirt raised his voice and called out, "Officer, there's a disturbance here. I believe these men are attempting to kidnap a woman and possibly her unborn child." The mention of the train police sent a visible wave of panic through the 2 men. Their expressions changed instantly. Without another word, they turned and fled. Once the danger had passed, the man helped me up and led me back to a seat. "Those 2 were no good," he said quietly. "Most likely human traffickers. And from the look in their eyes, I wouldn't be surprised if they have a criminal record, possibly even for violent offenses." A chill ran through me and my face went pale. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. Perhaps sensing my fear, the man offered to switch seats with the woman who had been next to me so he could sit beside me and keep an eye on me. I leaned against the seat, still shaken from what had just happened. My mind spun in confusion. Why did everything feel so different in this life? Why were so many things not as they used to be? "Are you all right?" he asked suddenly. I blinked, then gave him a faint smile and shook my head. "I'm fine, just startled, that's all." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of candy, a White Rabbit milk candy. "Here, have something sweet," he said gently. "It can help calm your nerves. Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you or your baby." I hesitated for a moment before finally accepting the candy from his hand. "And just so you know," he added, "I'm Dr. Julian Cole. I'm the head of neurology at the provincial hospital. Here's my ID and my hospital credentials." He handed them to me for verification. "Nice to meet you, Dr. Cole," I said, managing a weak smile. Soon the train pulled into the next station. Julian stood up and took my hand. "Your condition is serious. You need to be admitted to the hospital right away. I'll take you there myself." He led me off the train without hesitation. As I looked up at his tall figure walking just ahead of me, something inside me softened, and my throat tightened. There was a time when I had imagined Ethan might do the same, that he would be the one to care for me, to hold me, to protect our child. But in the end, his warmth, his tenderness, none of it had ever belonged to me. It had always been reserved for Nora. The sky was still dark when we arrived at the emergency room. Fortunately, the hospital had a night shift staff. Julian quickly explained my condition to the nurse at the front desk, who nodded and began making arrangements. I was soon placed on a bed and an IV was started. While the medical staff worked, Julian took care of my hospital paperwork. A few minutes later, he returned with a cup of warm brown sugar water. "Here," he said, offering it with both hands. "Have a sip, it will help. It's still early, so the shops aren't open yet. But as soon as they are, I'll go get you something warm and nourishing to eat." The sugar water was still steaming, faint wisps of vapor curling into the air. That warmth, so gentle and quiet, rose to my eyes and blurred my vision. Brown sugar had always been a luxury I could never afford. Ethan's workplace had given out some not long ago, but he had passed it straight to Nora without a second thought. With red-rimmed eyes, I drank the cup of brown sugar water slowly, letting the warmth spread through my chest. Julian stood nearby, grinning with satisfaction, as if this small act of kindness brought him genuine joy. After finishing the drink, I drifted off into an exhausted sleep. I didn't know how much time had passed when I suddenly woke up, suffocating. My eyes shot open to see a man wearing a face mask leaning over me, pressing something firmly against my nose and mouth. "You and the baby both need to die," he hissed. My heart stopped. How had Nora managed this? It wasn't enough that she sent traffickers after me on the train. Now she had sent someone to kill me outright. Terror surged through me, and I fought back with every ounce of strength I had. Just then, the door slammed open with a loud bang. Julian rushed in and tackled the masked man to the ground. They wrestled violently. The intruder, taking advantage of a brief opening, kicked Julian aside and made a break for the door. Julian stumbled but quickly returned to my side, supporting me with one arm. "We have to leave now," he said urgently. "We're going to Yao." Meanwhile, things between Ethan and Nora were not as harmonious as they once seemed. Previously, when I had been forced to tell everyone in the village that Nora had been unfaithful, Ethan had publicly scolded me for lying, believing I was smearing her name out of spite. But just days later, Nora was caught in public, hugging and holding hands with another man. Although they hadn't done anything more, as Ethan's fiancée, the incident caused a major scandal. Ethan was furious when he found out. "I told you before," he said to her sharply. "Clara is not the kind of person who would accuse someone without reason. I said I would look into it, but you insisted she was making it all up." It was only then that Ethan began to realize that something was terribly wrong. The Nora he remembered had always been gentle and kind, someone who never spoke ill of others. But now, she constantly whispered criticisms about me in his ear. In contrast, I had never once said a bad word about Nora. Each time there had been a conflict, I was the one on the losing side, the one who looked hurt and wronged. Ethan started to see that things were not as he had imagined. Ever since Nora had returned, he had gone out of his way to care for her and her child. Their shared childhood and her struggles as a single mother had made him feel responsible for her. But it had never been love. He only ever saw her as a younger sister, someone he needed to protect. He had told me that his marriage to Nora was temporary, that once things settled down, he would return to me. At the time, he had meant it. Now, finally, he realized just how many mistakes he had made. Again and again, he had doubted me, despite knowing deep down that I was not someone who would hurt others without cause. Nora's schemes had blinded him. There had even been a moment under Nora's calculated seduction when he had almost lost control completely. The more Ethan thought about it, the more agitated he became. I had changed too. I had become quieter, more distant. I no longer looked at him with the same hope and love in my eyes. As Ethan turned to leave, Nora grabbed his arm from behind. "Ethan," she said softly, "Leo has been feeling unwell all day. He really wants you to stay with him. Could you spend some more time with him?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a kind of hunger, a determination she could not hide. No one knew the truth. Nora had also lived this life once before. She had been reborn. Back to the moment she first returned to the village. Back then, she had failed to get rid of my child. So now, to protect her future, she pretended to be a devoted mother, using the child as a tool to bind Ethan to her. In her previous life, she had drowned herself and the child because of me. But she had survived. A widower had rescued her. That man, childless and lonely, had kept her locked inside his home and forced her to bear his children. Eventually, she could not endure it any longer. She attacked him with a knife and tried to escape, but slipped into the river during her flight. That time, she truly died. After being given a second chance at life, Nora made a firm decision. This time around, she would cling tightly to Ethan and never let go. But something was different. The Clara in this life was nothing like the woman she remembered from before. Even some of her past memories seemed to shift, leaving Nora feeling increasingly uncertain. She could no longer fully control Ethan as she had once done. What was even more terrifying was the change she saw in him. He looked regretful. Regretful about our divorce. Regretful that he had married her. Worse yet, he had begun talking about divorcing her and possibly remarrying me, the woman he used to hate. Nora could not allow that to happen. With this in mind, she suddenly grabbed Ethan by the arm and tried to pull him into the bedroom. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, frowning. "Come with me, Ethan. You'll understand," Nora insisted, tugging at him with more force. She dragged him into the room and shut the door behind them. Then, without warning, she began taking off her clothes. "What are you doing?" Ethan shouted, shocked. "It's the middle of the day. Stop this nonsense." He pushed her away and turned toward the door. He hadn't seen me for days and had been thinking about me nonstop. He didn't know how I was doing or if I was even safe. When he got back home, he immediately looked for me, but my room was empty. Everything was gone. Dust had already begun to settle, as if no one had lived there in weeks. Ethan stood frozen, overwhelmed with a sudden gut-wrenching panic. He rushed out to search for me. Nora, who had followed him, quickly blocked his path. "She left you!" Nora cried, clutching his arm. "Clara took everything, her clothes, her money. She's gone for good. She doesn't want you anymore." Ethan refused to believe her. Nora dragged him to a neighbor's house, hoping they would back her up. But the neighbor only gave Ethan a disapproving look before speaking. "Commander Vance, I don't mean to overstep, but Clara was a good woman. How could you not treasure her? All these years, she worked herself to the bone running the household alone, just so you could serve in the military without worry. And then you divorced her, saying she cheated on you?" The neighbor cast a scornful glance at Nora. "If anyone was sneaking around, it wasn't Clara. You might want to look a little closer at someone else." The neighbor then added, "And another thing, Clara might look fragile, but I could tell she's pregnant. You drove your pregnant wife out of the house? How could you call yourself a man?" Ethan's face went pale. A sharp pain pierced through his chest. He had been so focused on Nora that he had completely forgotten that I was carrying his child. Everything about this situation felt wrong. He had to get to the truth. He ordered a full investigation into what had happened, and what he found shattered him. Nora had staged everything. She had framed me, making it look like I had falsely accused her of cheating. She had secretly drugged my food, nearly causing me to lose the baby. She had even sent people to try and lure me away. And worst of all, she had arranged for someone to kill me. Ethan was shaking with rage. He grabbed Nora by the throat. "How could you do this?" he shouted. "Clara is carrying my child." He glared at her, his voice trembling. "Tell me the truth, Nora. What else have you done?" Meanwhile, I had been brought by Julian to a well-known provincial hospital that specialized in traditional medicine. He wore a white doctor's coat now, covering up the bright floral shirt he had worn on the train. Somehow the uniform made him look especially dignified. Julian took care of everything. All I had to do was cooperate with the tests and treatments. He even covered the costs himself, saying that employees of the hospital got discounts. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed money more than anything right now. So I decided to treat it as a loan, something I would repay in the future. That evening, after his shift ended, Julian came to see me with food in hand. He sat with me while I ate, even helping me draw water for washing up. He was a stranger, someone I had met only once, and yet he had gone out of his way to care for me as if I were someone important. My heart was overwhelmed with gratitude. I had thought that leaving behind my familiar home and family would make life impossible. But I was wrong. There are still kind people in this world. And in that moment, I truly appreciated Julian's quiet, unassuming kindness. On the third day of my hospital stay, Ethan barged in unexpectedly. I was in the middle of having a bowl of porridge when he suddenly stormed into the room and grabbed my arm. The bowl tipped over, spilling hot porridge all over me. "Clara, you're finally back," he said urgently. "Come with me. You're going home." Before I could react, he reached for the IV line in my hand and yanked it out. Blood immediately welled up from the needle site. It stung, but not nearly as much as the searing pain in my heart. I shoved him away with all my strength, my voice shaking with fury. How dare you show your face here? Thanks to you and Nora, my baby and I almost died. Do you have any idea what you have done? I screamed for help, calling out desperately for the nurses. Ethan, is that what you want? To see me and the baby dead? My voice cracked as I stared at him, remembering everything I had endured along the way. The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal. It was all too much. Unable to hold back any longer, I grabbed the metal lunchbox from the nightstand and hurled it at him with all the strength I had left. Do you even know I'm pregnant? Do you know how much I have suffered? Do you even remember we are divorced? And now you want me to go back with you based on what? Ethan stood frozen, stunned by my words and the raw force of my anger. The noise had drawn attention, and within moments, several nurses rushed into the room. Right behind them came Julian. He took one look at the chaotic scene, blood on the sheets, porridge on the floor, and Ethan standing there, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. This is a hospital room, Julian said sharply. Unauthorized visitors are not allowed. I'm her husband, Ethan growled, frowning. Julian turned to me and asked, Is that true? No, I replied calmly. We are divorced. Julian nodded once. Then he turned to the nurses. Call security. Minutes later, the hospital's security team arrived and escorted a protesting Ethan out of the room. Julian stayed behind. He ordered the staff to clean the room and then sat with me for a while, offering quiet comfort. I thought that would be the end of it, that after being thrown out, Ethan would finally give up and leave. But I was wrong. That very night, he returned. This time, I didn't scream or throw anything. I just looked at him calmly and said, Commander Vance, we are no longer married. Ethan looked at me, clenched his jaw, and finally spoke. Clara, I know everything now. I'm not going to marry Nora. He stepped closer, his voice softening. Clara, I know you still love me. Can we start over, just the three of us, as a family? I let out a low, humorless laugh, shaking my head slowly. Ethan, do you even realize what I have been through? I didn't know, he muttered. You didn't know, I repeated, my voice dripping with ice. But Nora used your name, your power. She did all of it because you let her. She falsely accused me, spread rumors that I was unfaithful, drugged me, and even tried to have me hurt, time and time again. She crossed every line imaginable. And you stood by and let it happen. Do you really think I can just pretend none of it happened? Ethan looked ashamed. I'm sorry, Clara. I know I was wrong, but I can change. Please, just give me a chance. It's too late, I said firmly. Then I showed him to the door and closed it behind him. Julian walked in shortly after, a gentle smile on his face, as if nothing had happened. A few days later, I was discharged from the hospital, but I had nowhere to go. That was when Julian stepped in. He told me he had a small, empty apartment near the hospital. He said I could stay there for a while. He insisted on calling it a rental and said I would have to pay him rent. I agreed with a smile. On moving day, Ethan showed up again. He looked at me and said, Clara, I know you're still upset. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But you are still the mother of my child. I can't just walk away. At least let me help you move. Let me make sure you're all right. Before I could respond, Julian appeared and came to stand beside me. He looked at Ethan with cold amusement and said, Commander Vance seems to have a lot of free time. No military duties today? Ethan's face darkened. This has nothing to do with you. Julian smirked. Then let me show you just how much it does. Without waiting for a reply, Julian grabbed Ethan by the arm and pulled him away. Soon after, shouting erupted from outside the gate. You're irresponsible, a disgrace! Julian's voice rang out. You cheated. You're a failure as a man, and you call yourself a commander? What a joke. You're an insult to everything the word soldier stands for. A few moments later, Ethan came back, his face dark and bruised. He looked down at me and said quietly, Clara, I will make this right. I swear to you, I will avenge you. Please, I whispered, just go. After that, Ethan went back and launched a full investigation into Nora. Everything came to light. Her affairs with multiple men, how she used Ethan's status to harm me, how she manipulated everyone around her, one thing after another. Every detail was uncovered. In the end, Nora's downfall was complete. She was arrested and sent to prison for interfering in a military marriage, a serious offense. All of this came to light, I later learned, thanks to Julian. He had asked a friend back in his hometown to help dig up the truth. Later, Julian proposed to me, and I said yes. On the day of our wedding, as I stood surrounded by family and friends, Nora suddenly appeared out of nowhere, holding a knife and lunging straight at me. Before I could react, Ethan appeared and threw himself in front of me, taking the stab that was meant for me. Nora was quickly subdued and taken away by the police. Ethan was rushed to the hospital. Thankfully, his injuries were not life-threatening, but the doctor said he would need a long time to fully recover. Once his wound had been dressed and he was stable, I went to see him. Ethan looked up at me, his voice rough. "Clara, I'm sorry. I raised my hand to stop him. "Let it go." His eyes turned red as he stared at me. I smiled gently. "Ethan, the truth is, you never really loved anyone. When I was assigned to your post, Nora had just run away from an engagement. You were hurting, and I was a convenient distraction. When Nora returned, all your old feelings came rushing back. You started caring about her again, paying attention to her. And this child," I said, placing a hand on my belly. "You only cared because you felt guilty. After you learned all the terrible things Nora had done, you realized how badly you had treated me. But that's all it was. Guilt, not love. You never loved me. You never loved her either, Ethan. The only person you ever truly loved was yourself. So let me go and let yourself go too." Ethan froze, as if something inside him had suddenly snapped, trapping him in a place from which he could not escape. And as I watched him sit there, stunned and silent, I smiled. Yes, I had said those words on purpose. Ethan had always been a man full of pride and complexity. The more I said I didn't care, the harder it would be for him to ever move on. I wanted him to live the rest of his life with this weight on his chest. He had hurt me. He had hurt my child. And no punishment would ever be enough. But this was all I could do. In this lifetime, I would never be entangled with Ethan Vance again. 2 years later, I gave birth to a daughter with Julian. The four of us, Julian, our son, our daughter, and I, lived a peaceful, joyful life. Another 2 years passed. One day, news came from back home. Ethan had died. Before he passed, he left behind his entire estate. He had willed everything to me, and he left one final message, saying that he hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive him. I never expected that the words I spoke to him that day would weigh so heavily on his heart that even in his final moments, he was still consumed by guilt. But it was all in the past now. In this life, I would never be connected to him again. I did not accept the inheritance. Instead, I asked the organization to donate it to families in need. As for Nora, she passed away after a long illness. Her child, Leo, was adopted by a kind couple who could not have children of their own. From what I heard, the child was doing well. "Mom!" My son ran up to me, his face alight with a bright smile. "Tomorrow is Father's Day. Can we go out and celebrate?" I turned and looked at Julian. We both smiled. "Of course," I said. In this life, I had found people who truly loved me and people I could love in return. Love and happiness had finally come to stay in our home,